Let us read Proverbs 16, verse 4. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. Imagine standing at a busy railway station late at night. Trains arrive and depart according to a timetable you cannot see. Some rush past without stopping. Others linger, some are delayed, and a few seem to arrive at the most inconvenient hour. To the weary traveler, the moment feels chaotic and even pointless. But somewhere far from the platform, there is a control room. Lights blink, switches move, signals change, and a large intelligence ensures that every train reaches its intended destination. What feels random at ground level is purposeful from above. Much of life feels like that platform. We see fragments, delays, collisions, and injustices, and we wonder whether anything is truly under control. Proverbs 16:4 invites us into the control room of faith. It calls us to lift our eyes above the platform and learn to rest in the sovereignty of God. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. It is a profound saying, and for many, an unsettling one. It brings together two truths that run side by side throughout Scripture: God's absolute sovereignty and human moral responsibility. These truths are not enemies, though they often feel like tension points in our minds. They do not contradict each other because they originate in the wisdom of God Himself. We may struggle to fuse them together on the anvil of human logic, but they remain perfectly balanced in God's economy. Learning to rest in God's sovereignty begins with accepting that mystery without trying to flatten it. The proverb begins with a sweeping claim: the Lord has made everything for its purpose. That word, everything, leaves nothing out. It assumes that all of creation, animate and inanimate, visible and invisible, is not accidental or useless in God's eternal plan. Nothing exists outside His wise intention. This does not mean that everything is pleasant, understandable, or immediately good from our perspective. It means that nothing is meaningless. There are no loose threads in God's universe. When we deal with people, circumstances, success, failure, joy, and sorrow, we are engaging realities that are held within a larger, wiser design. This theme runs through Proverbs 16 like a steady undercurrent. Human beings make plans, cast lots, choose paths, and set goals, but the Lord determines outcomes. The plans of the heart belong to man, Solomon says, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Again, the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Proverbs 16:4 stretches that truth beyond individual decisions and applies it universally. Events, people, intentions, and outcomes all ultimately fit within God's purposeful governance. This does not mean that everything that happens in the world is morally good or that God approves of every human action. Scripture is clear that God is holy, righteous, and opposed to evil. Nor does it mean that human beings are puppets without responsibility, acting out a script forced upon them. Rather, it means that nothing escapes God's ultimate control. Even what opposes Him cannot derail His eternal purposes. Evil is real, choices are real, guilt is real, but none of these are ultimate. The life of Joseph offers a helpful window into this truth. As a young man, Joseph received dreams from God that pointed toward a future shaped by divine favor. His brothers responded not with faith, but with jealousy and hatred. They conspired against him and said with chilling confidence, "Come now, let us kill him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." In their minds, they were powerful enough to cancel God's purposes. Yet, while they plotted in the open, God was working behind the scenes. Years later, after betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and imprisonment, Joseph stood in a position of authority he could never have engineered for himself. Looking back, he did not excuse his brother's sin, nor did he minimize their cruelty. He simply spoke one of the clearest summaries of divine sovereignty in all of Scripture. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Human intentions were sinful, but God's purposes were wise and redemptive. Joseph learned to rest in the truth, and it transformed bitterness into forgiveness and suffering into worship. The second half of this verse is where many readers stumble, even the wicked for the day of trouble. Scripture repeatedly affirms that God does not create people wicked, nor does he delight in evil. Wickedness arises from human hearts that turn away from God. So the proverb is not saying that God makes people wicked in order to use them. Rather, it teaches that even those who choose wickedness are not beyond God's sovereign reach. They act freely from their own desires, yet their actions, even their rebellion, remain subject to God's ultimate purposes. Paradoxically, they often end up serving those purposes without ever intending to do so. History and scripture offer sobering examples. Pharaoh hardened his heart and defiantly asked, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice?" He acted out of pride and resistance, not obedience. Yet, through Pharaoh's stubbornness, God displayed his power and made his name known. Assyria marched with arrogance, believing itself unstoppable. Yet God described that empire as the rod of my anger, using it to discipline his people before judging Assyria for its own sins. Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus with calculated intent and personal greed. Yet, through that betrayal, God accomplished the redemption of the world. In none of these cases did God coerce evil. He overruled it. The actors were guilty. God remained righteous. The day of trouble mentioned in Proverbs refers to a time when God's justice is revealed and evil is exposed, restrained, or judged. In the wisdom literature, this is not limited to a distant final judgment, though it includes that. It can be any moment when God steps into history, into nations, or into individual lives to enforce moral accountability. Wickedness may appear strong, clever, and successful for a season, but it is never permanent. It is purposeful, but not triumphant. God allows its course to run until the moment when justice serves his righteous order. Evil has an expiration date. This truth steadies the heart of the righteous. The psalmist echoes it when he says that the Lord knows the days of the blameless, but the wicked will perish. Ecclesiastes reminds us that there is a time for everything under heaven. Proverbs 16:4 assures us that evil is not random and certainly not final. God has not lost control of this world. When we are surrounded by violence, corruption, injustice, and an unending stream of troubling news, this verse becomes an anchor. It tells us that no one can ultimately thwart God's purposes through evil deeds. God may allow evil for a season, but he never allows it to triumph. Evil never has the last word. This is not wishful thinking. It is a confession of faith grounded in the character of God. There are dangers, however, in how we read this proverb. One danger is fatalism, which shrugs and says, it doesn't matter what we do. Everything will happen exactly as God has decided anyway. That attitude erodes responsibility and invites careless living. Another danger is a harsh determinism that claims God causes people to do evil in order to fulfill his purposes, breeding bitterness toward God and doubt about his goodness. Proverbs allows neither. Scripture consistently holds two truths together without apology. God is sovereign over all, and human beings are accountable for their choices. The very next verse declares that the arrogant will not go unpunished. God's purpose never excuses sin. It guarantees that sin will not have the last word. So, how do we live with this truth? When injustice seems unchecked and evil appears to prosper, this verse steadies us. It reminds us that God's leash is never broken and that judgment, though sometimes delayed, is certain. It assures us that God will one day bring order to chaos and right every wrong. The resurrection of Jesus stands as God's public guarantee that history is moving toward righteous judgment. For those tempted toward arrogance or injustice, this proverb is a warning. Persistent rebellion leads toward a day of trouble. For believers, it is not frightening, but deeply reassuring. It tells us that obedience is never wasted, suffering is never meaningless, and faith is never misplaced. Learning to rest in God's sovereignty does not mean understanding everything. It means trusting someone greater than ourselves. It means refusing to surrender to despair when we cannot see the timetable. It means choosing faith over cynicism, humility over control, and obedience over fear. Practically, it calls us to live responsibly, pray honestly, act justly, and leave outcomes in God's hands. When we do, we discover a deep rest, the rest of knowing that the world does not rest on our shoulders, but on His. God bless.